everyone, welcome back. My name's Diana, this is my channel Bookish Di, and today I'm wrapping up my November in reading. So once again, I only read 5 books in the month of November. That seems to be like my consistent reading level, unless I'm like actively trying to read more, just because I tend to play video games or play D&D and other things. So I tend not to have, I've been bad recently about having some dedicated reading time, but for the most part, I did enjoy what I read. There was one book that I have kind of mixed feelings on, which I will discuss later on. So let's get into it. The first book that I read in the month of November was Prime Deceptions, written by Valerie Valdes, narrated by Almarie Guerra. This is the sequel to Chilling Effect. It's an adult science fiction novel, and it follows Captain Eva Inocente and her crew on the cargo ship La Sirena Negra, and it picks up after Chilling Effect, and deals with Eva having to try and track down one of her crewmates' brothers at the request of some associates of her sister. And in order to do so, she has to return to the planet where she made a mistake and has to confront her past. So I had read Chilling Effect in March of this year, and I had enjoyed parts of it, but parts of it I didn't enjoy. And the parts that I didn't enjoy were, namely, it felt like Eva's characterization was a little all over the place, and I really didn't like how it felt like she was picking up the idiot ball in regards to her I don't know what that cat's getting into, in regards to her not telling her crew what was going on. And so I'm happy to say that those two things, in my opinion, were addressed in this book. So I felt like in the sequel, Eva's characterization works better for me. And I also really liked that in situations where someone like comes to Eva with a proposal, instead of agreeing to something and then hiding that from her crew, she instead says, let me get back to you. I need to discuss this with my crew so we can vote on it. And I really liked the fact that we see that growth for her, and that there does seem to be consequences to what happened in the first book. So I really liked that. I continue to enjoy the casual Cubanness of the book. So there's a lot of Spanish sprinkled throughout. We get to meet Eva's mother, who is very, very Cuban. We also get disability rep with Eva's mother. And I also like kind of the prickly sisterly relationship between Eva and her sister Mari. And I also like the central romantic pairing. Some things that didn't work quite well for me. The pacing, particularly towards the end, felt a little off, and stuff happens at the end that it felt a little rushed, and there wasn't a whole lot of time at the end of the book to unpack what happened. So I'm very interested to see what's going on in the sequel. But like I said, there was stuff pacing wise that didn't really work for me. And I will say, one thing I forgot to mention, things that I enjoyed. If in the first book you're a little sad about the lack of psychic cat action, particularly because they're on the cover of the book, I'm pleased to say that there are more psychic cats in this book, particularly the ringleader Mala. She actually plays a fairly central role in what happens on Guerra, which is great. And I will say, if the first book was very Mass Effect-y, the second book also has Mass Effect vibes, but there are also Pokemon vibes, which I won't explain what is going on with that, but just know that like there are Pokemon influences, and I really enjoyed like just seeing the different types of media that influence Valdes. So I would say I would give this on a whole like a 3.75 to 4 stars out of 5. And I'm definitely interested in picking up the final book in this series, Fault Tolerance. And I, again, will probably listen to an audiobook just because Almarie Guerra's narration just works so well for me. And I know that was a key factor in me finally finishing the first book, and it helped me with this book. So if you're looking for a fun sci-fi romp, I would recommend this series. The next book I read was a nonfiction book. It was The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together by Heather McGhee. This is part history, part economics book. So Heather McGhee is an economist who used to work at a think tank called Demos. And I initially become aware of this book because she was a guest on a podcast where she was talking about her theories that she goes into in this book. And I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. And I borrowed the book from the library and ended up really enjoying it and got my own copy because this is something I definitely want to reread and annotate. So essentially what McGhee goes into in this book is talking about how racism from the very beginning of America's founding has impacted society negatively on an economic scale. So one of the things that she talks about is, or economically and socially, one of the things she talks about is, for example, is the closing of public pools in the 1950s and 60s as a result of the push for integration. So prior to that, America had a lot of these, lavish public pools that any white person could go to, and it was kind of this mixing of classes that you could either get in for free or for relatively low. But again, it was a whites only space. And when you had the push to integrate these spaces, instead of integrating them, cities would either close them, destroy them, let them fall into disrepair, and white folks would then go into private pools that they could segregate and could keep blacks out of. And so now, instead of having this legacy of, very elaborate public pools, we don't really have that anymore in America. So she talks about things like that. She talks about subprime mortgages and how the things that led to the tanking of the economy in 2008, and I would say that are still reverberating throughout our economy now, started with subprime mortgages being offered to blacks and other racialized minorities, and how especially how this would happen with people who were taking out like a second or refinancing their houses and being pushed into these subprime mortgages that even when they might have qualified for a prime rate mortgage. And so she talks about how, BIPOC folks are the testing ground for like a lot of these terrible practices, and how no one really notices until it reverberates into white communities. And then she also talks about how when she calls it I can't remember the exact title, or the solidarity dividend, that's it, where there's working across racial lines to achieve this dividend. So she talks about specific places where this has happened. So she talks about the city of Richmond in Northern California, where there's a lot of oil refineries, and how there's been cross-racial collaboration for more environmentally sound practices, because there's this thought that, only like the poor Black or the poor Asian communities are affected by this, when it was really everyone being affected. But when people started working together to address the pollution issues and make sure that the refineries were being held accountable, it benefited everyone in the city. So I really enjoyed this book. I think it's one of the best nonfiction books that I read this year. And like I said, I definitely want to reread and annotate it, because I think there was things that I didn't quite get the first time around. So I ranked this 5 out of 5 stars, and I would highly recommend this. I think this is a really great book. It helps explain, I think, a lot of things that happen in society and how people will dig in their heels about working to address inequalities when it comes to race, because they view it as a zero-sum game, instead of it being some people benefiting from, mostly the rich folks benefiting from people of lower economic classes across racial divides. So anyway, I highly recommend this book. I don't think I'm doing a good job of talking it up, but it's very good. I very much enjoyed this. The next book that I read that I also quite enjoyed was A Thorn in the Saddle by Rebekah Weatherspoon. This is the third in her Cowboys of California romance series. It is a contemporary cowboy romance series, that follow three brothers. So this follows the eldest brother, Jesse, and his romantic partner, Lily Grace. And so Jesse is essentially the head of the three brothers, Zach and Sam, that we've already followed. And this is kind of a Beauty and the Beast reinterpretation. So the book starts with Jesse really reacting violently to finding his grandmother with her new paramour, and the paramour's daughter basically having none of Jesse's shit, calling him out on it and saying like, no, you need to do the work and change, which he does. And so they then get together, obviously because it's a romance. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. For the most part, I've pretty much liked everything by Rebekah Weatherspoon that I've read, particularly these Cowboys of California book. I think that they're fun fairy tale reinterpretations, where I like the romances in this. I think one of the things I particularly liked about this one is that Jesse doesn't rely on Grace to do the work for him. He, after that confrontation, like goes out on his own to find a therapist to try and address his anger issues, and like is doing the work separately from his romantic relationship with her. And for her, I liked the fact that she's kind of at a crossroads. So she had been a Black woman in tech, and had dealt with some sexual harassment and the fallout from a relationship ending, and she's trying to figure out what does she want to do next with her life. And you get growth from both of them. And one thing, again, I just really liked was they communicate with each other, that the third act bleak moment wasn't them breaking up due to a lack of communication, but it was something else involved, which if you've seen my videos, you know that's like one thing I enjoy it when authors do something different with the third act bleak moment instead of it being a breakup due to, for the most part, miscommunication, just because I find that really I'm not interested in it. And so I really enjoy it when authors like Weatherspoon do something different with that. There was some things in regards to Jesse's family that, particularly his relationship with his parents, that I thought was a little rushed, and I wasn't completely sold on how that concluded. But overall, I very much enjoyed this book. I gave it a 4.25 out of 5 stars. And again, if you're looking for fun, sexy contemporary, I can't recommend this series enough. I think Weatherspoon's writing is just really great, and this was something that I think I really needed in this year in terms of the type of romance that she writes. So yeah, I loved this book. Very, very good. The fourth book that I read is sadly the one that I had mixed feelings on, and that is We Light Up the Sky by Lilliam Rivera. This is a YA science fiction novel. It follows 3 teens, Rafa, Pedro, and Luna, who are dealing with an alien invasion, and they're all dealing with their own separate issues. So Pedro is, I would say he's queer teen who's dealing with an abusive domineering uncle. You have Rafa, who he and his family are dealing with being unhoused. And then Luna, who's grieving the death of her cousin, and just kind of trying to navigate high school as someone who's deeply grieving that loss. So this is a book that I had a few issues with. I think primarily the main issue I had was the world building component. And I think that's because, so this book takes place 2 years after COVID started. And aside from that mention that COVID had happened, that Luna's cousin had died from COVID, and that there had been, losses in the community that Luna, Rafa, and Pedro live in, it didn't feel present. And for me, that just kind of rang false, given that we're, almost 2 years into this pandemic. People are still wearing masks. We're still, wearing masks. It's not over. And so that felt really hollow. And it also felt like the fact that it was something that was mentioned, but then not really mentioned. it felt weird to me. And like, I can understand why Rivera might have put that in, because she wanted to reflect the realities that teens like Pedro, Rafa, and Luna are living in. But I don't know how, like, I don't know if there was a way to do that, but the way that COVID was integrated into this book just didn't work for me, and that kind of took away from a lot of my enjoyment. The other thing that didn't really work for me was the pacing on this one. The pacing just felt really rushed, because it's a short book. It's less than 250 pages, and I think this is a book where it could have used an extra 20 to 50 pages, just because so much happened, and it was very fast paced, where it just didn't feel like there was a lot of room for the story to breathe. So yeah, the pacing, the world building just really didn't work for me. I did enjoy the characters though. I thought Rafa, Pedro, and Luna were very well written. I really liked the examination of just this all-encompassing grief that Luna's feeling. And then you have Rafa, who wants to be there for his family and is dealing with the fact that, you know, he's living in this rough situation. And then with Pedro, his relationships with his mom and his uncle, and being this, you know, loud, flamboyant teenager. I also kind of liked how Rivera created these aliens, but yeah, this one, I ended up giving like a 3.25 out of 5 stars, and I'm a little sad, because this one was something that I was looking forward to, but it didn't work for me. I definitely think though that I know I'm not the target audience for this. Like Rivera has talked about that she wrote this book for teens, like the 3 main characters in this book. So maybe this works better for teens. It sadly didn't work for me. The last book I read in the month of November was A Marvellous Life by Freya Marske. This is a fantasy romance set in Edwardian England, and it follows 2 men, Robin Blythe, who has been, due to an old enemy of his parents taking revenge on their son, assigned to what seems like a dead-end home office career, but instead is a liaison to the unseen magical world of England. And then Edwin Corsi, who is Robin's counterpart from the magical world to the mundane world. And they discover that Robin's predecessor has disappeared, and then Robin gets cursed, and they have to not only find out what caused his predecessor's disappearance, but also deal with Robin's curse, and they fall in love. So I very much enjoyed this. I thought that Marsky's writing in this was very, very good. I liked both Robin and Edwin. They're very much, I wouldn't say grumpy sunshine, but they're 2 men who are different. Like Robin is more of the jock and Edwin is more of the bookish type, and they're both dealing with their different traumas in regards to their family. But I think Robin is in a slightly better way because he has a better relationship with his younger sister Maud, who is a delight. I love Maud so much, and I really hope that we get her story soon because I think she's fantastic. Whereas Edwin's family is god-awful, and if they all died in a fire, except for Edwin's mom, I would not cry about it. So they're dealing with their own issues regarding their families, while they're falling in love. And yeah, I really liked the magic system that Marske came up with. So casting magic is called cradling, and it's similar to doing a cat's cradle. And so like powerful magic users don't need a string, but someone like Edwin, who might not necessarily have as much pure magic as someone like his family, does need to uses the string in order to cast his spell. So I thought that was very interesting. Like I said, I really enjoyed the relationship between Edwin and Robin. I thought that was written pretty well, especially, seeing them lower their walls to each other and seeing that relationship develop. One thing that I do wish had been kind of explored more was, so this takes place in 1908, and the main protagonists are like upper class English folks, and you do get a little bit of a mention of like the empire and everything, with Robin's secretary, who is half Indian, like subcontinent Indian. But there just isn't a lot, and I felt like, I don't know, I was thinking about it because this is kind of similar to Witchmark, but it's similar like in terms of like the time period and a little bit of the vibe, but I think Witchmark did a better job of dealing with like the colonial imperialist portion of that than this one. But yeah, for the most part though, I really liked this. I would say if you're looking for fantasy romance, pick this up. There are sex scenes in this, just warning in case you don't want that, but I really enjoyed this. I'm looking forward to the sequels because this is the first in a series, and yeah, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. So that was my November in reading. For the most part, fairly solid, aside from the one I have mixed feelings on. Have you read any of the books that I read? Do any of them sound interesting? Please let me know in the comments below. And thank you so much. And well, Leia's like, how dare you, Mom? Thank you so much, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.